Welcome back to another episode of We Don't Know What to Watch with your host, the Kevin Costner to my James Earl Jones, Kyle Mulford, and me, Noah Saturn.
What did we watch? What did we watch this time?
We watched a documentary called Sustainable from 2016.
A documentary? Documentaries are boring.
On Netflix. Well, documentaries aren't boring. Some of the best movies I've seen are documentaries. And what's fun about documentaries is that you can't necessarily judge them on the same scale you can watching like a fiction movie. Like, I'm not going to judge a documentary like March of the Penguins on the same scale I'd judge something like Star Wars.
Yeah, they're their own subclass. You know, like everything has like different genres, but you can all rate them very similarly. But like, yeah, documentaries, it's very hard to.
It's like reading a fiction book versus reading a nonfiction book. There's some clear distinction, although there is some overlap with stuff like occasional, like some really weird stuff like F for Fake kind of goes in between fiction and nonfiction in some interesting ways.
Well, then you can still grade it on how it was shot and how it was put together, like the basics of that. But like, you know, there's no plot. Not really a plot or a story or whatever. But so you kind of grade it on the content itself, because if it's really terrible content and shouldn't have been made a documentary, it's going to get a bad grade. But how was this one? Sustainable from 2016, like you said. What's the gist of this movie? What's your snowball pitch, if you will?
The basic idea is all about saying about the thesis statement, so to speak. So this is, like writing a term paper. Everything has a big thesis statement, and you kind of work through, and then towards the end you try and all wrap it up all together. The thesis statement, if I can talk, goes like this. Basically, how the current farming model, the industrial farming model, and the conventional farming is bad, and the best way forward is actually through sustainable organic farming. And now what does that mean? What does that entail? And what does that look like for an average small farmer?
Yeah, and we find out, through this that we're kind of going, it's almost like we're going full circle, because they mentioned, which is true, that like 50 years ago, everything that's cool now, where it's like, oh, I'm going and I want to go see, I want stuff fresh from the farmer and all this stuff, like it's this new thing. And 50 years ago, that's the only way they did it.
Yeah, like you go into your local farmer's market, get some sweet corn or whatever. You go to the local pumpkin patch, get your pumpkin.
And see the great pumpkin with Linus.
Yes.
Or
David S. Pumpkins. There was a David S. Pumpkins animated special with Tom Hanks.
That's weird.
Yeah, but I liked it. It was pretty funny.
I don't know what David S. Pumpkins is.
It was an SNL gag from 2017. It's very bizarre. It was for a Halloween episode last time he hosted.
Yeah, we're going back, like I said, full circle, because, let's focus on where this opens up, like how they open this. They talk to this guy, Rick Bayless. He's a chef in Illinois. And he's not the main focus of this documentary, but he kind of leads into the focus, because he's a chef that wants fresh produce. And he found this farmer who will deliver straight to his restaurant. And this farmer's name is Marty Travis. And he's just a farmer in Illinois. And he'll go into Chicago and deliver food that he's grown. Him and his wife and his kid have grown to many restaurants in Chicago. And they own a farm, Spence Farms, that was in their family for a couple generations.
They had it for about 150 years, and then for 18 years they had sold it, and then after that they bought it back.
And they were saying that everything needed to be repaired, including the soil itself, because it was turned into your regular commercial farm where they just kind of destroy the ground. And they got it back, and they've slowly started getting the soil back, and they do no chemicals in their on their plants or anything, so it's very clean crops.
Who is the main character for this film? Our main focal point, I would argue it is Marty Travis, the farmer, because they come back to him a lot, and they shoot a lot of footage on his farm of him and of his life and of his family. So he's kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word, the protagonist of this documentary.
Yeah, and they kind of split it up into different seasons. So like they started in winter, and he kind of talks about what happens in the winter. You're just trying to keep warm, and like that you're just trying to survive the winter. And then it went into the spring, and then the summer, and then the fall, and just kind of had like a rotation of what it's like on the farm in each of these seasons.
And that's kind of the basic framing device that's used throughout the entire film. As you know, I'm hand gesturing in a primarily audio format.
Yes.
My hand gestures look great. So yes, because that's very easily divided into 4 parts for each of the 4 seasons.
And it kind of does this, but then after he talks a while and they tell what they do during that season, it kind of veers off into a subsection of like what's going to happen outside of their farm around that season. And then there's also little bits where they go into talking about what commercial farming is doing and how it's destroying things. What's interesting is for those of you, all you listeners that don't know, we are from Iowa, and there's a county in Boone County, Iowa, that is working on rotations that reduce the need for chemical fertilizers. Because right now, most Midwest farmers will rotate between, if you live in Iowa, you look at a field every year and you're going to see corn, then you're going to see soybeans, then you're going to see corn, then you're going to see soybeans. And it's just to like put the variety in to help the land a little bit. But it turns out that it's still not.
It's not good enough.
It's not good enough.
And sort of some of the more natural, like prairie grass and biodiversity. So one of the big key things that this documentary is about.
Yeah, and they learned that, what was it, some sort of clover or something, if you add that into the rotation, yes, you're going to have 1 year where that field is not producing, but you're also going to sustain the land for so much longer because it pulls carbon in from the air, and then you don't need the chemicals also, which is what's really destroying the land. It's destroying the soil itself. So pretty soon, all these farms are going to be, the soil's going to be so bad that they can't farm here anymore. And that's kind of how it's been for eons. We've kept going west and west and west because the land gets used up and we want to go get new land that is fresh and ready for crops again.
So the film kind of jumps around to all these different sources, but it always kind of returns to Marty Travis and his farm, the Spence farm. But it goes to people, sort of agricultural institutes and agricultural scientists. Then it also jumps over to kind of more wheat farming as opposed to Midwest, which is mainly corn and soybeans. And it talks about kind of someone looking for a grain conservancy, and they're all about finding ancient grains. So all this kind of ties in together because you find out that Marty is basically contacting all these chefs in Chicago as part of a cooperative of different farms around his immediate area in central Illinois, saying, okay, what do you guys want? We can grow it. We can do our best to grow it. Because we have the resources to grow it in a smaller operation. So basically he sends out an email a week representing this cooperative, like, okay, this is what we do. This is what we're growing. What do you guys want? So it's much more personal than say something like ordering something off, even off like a grocery store shelf.
It seems like some of these things, these plants that the chefs are ordering from them are stuff that there was one that took him 2 years to find a seed. And so they hunt for this stuff and get like a diversity that you're not going to see everywhere. So like these restaurants are getting something different than other restaurants are getting from just your stock.
Kind of your basic, like for example, if they want like a zucchini, it's not going to be like the same sort of zucchini because like any other sort of species, there's so many different varieties of zucchinis. So then what's interesting what the chefs can do is that they can go to I want this specific variety, which is originally from this specific area. Can you guys find this and grow this for me?
Yeah, and another thing I found interesting was the whole wheat thing, because they were talking about how there are so many different varieties of wheat, and yet the farms now, they breed the wheat for consistency and uniformity for so if they have one particular kind of wheat that they grow, then they know exactly when to water it, exactly when to plant it, exactly when to harvest it. and it's never going to diverse because it's all the same wheat. Whereas if they try to use different ones, then all of that's going to be different, and you can't have the bulk, the bulk harvesting and all of
The
that.
higher yield is in current farming is kind of their ultimate goal. High yields, get as much as possible, sell as much as possible, make a bunch of money. And that kind of goes back to the thesis statement, back to conventional farming. The farmers themselves aren't actually doing that well, but the corporations and all, of course, the other companies are the ones that are making the real money.
Yeah, and it's hard to tell what they can do, which I like what Marty and Spence Farms is doing and getting with all these other farms and sending to these restaurants. But you also got to ask, is that something that we can convert all farms to? Because they're going to just a few restaurants around the area, so for farm fresh and everything. But like some of the stuff has to get shipped to other parts of the country that doesn't have farms and needs this bulk stuff made. So that's one thing that they didn't really talk about in the film is that there are areas of the country and the world that like do need this food sent to them. And if they're doing it this other way, which is better for the environment, it also produces less because I think it takes a lot more man hours to be able to do this sustainability. But I do agree that it's great to work towards this and find a solution.
Well, I mean, I guess it's, short term versus super long term is kind of the main art, one of the crux of this film, and this film is at least advocating for the moment in their perspective for the ultimate long term, because with the ultimate long term, then, it's not just like 20 years from now, 30 years from now, it's like 100, 200 years from now, people will still be able to, live and survive.
Yeah, and they actually talk about that with a aquifer that's under the entire the heartland from like South Dakota down to Texas. There is a giant aquifer that supplies water for almost all of the states in that like row. And the rate that we're pulling the water out of there, they're estimating that we have 20 years left of that. And this was a 2016 documentary, which means that it was filmed in 2015. So we're already down to 17 years left. So in 17 years, we will have no more food or something. We'll all turn to cannibalism. So the other problem with this is the one thing that I liked about this is that they're trying to find ways to do this chemical free. And that's the biggest thing, because all these chemicals are creating nitrates in the soil it's running off. And then, of course, being in Iowa and Illinois, that's running off into the Mississippi, and that's going down. And apparently this is causing like dead zones in the Gulf
of Mexico. So that way, when people down in the Gulf of Mexico and shrimp fishermen, I mean, it kind of makes their job harder for another food source. So, like everything else, it's all connected in the circle of life. Something, something, something.
Simba is over there.
Simba the cat, not
Simba the cat. Yeah. The other thing I thought was kind of funny was there is another chef that they work with, and it was kind of cool because they are trying to build this community with people from the city and in the country and like merge the two, because some of the chefs from the city will get out of the city and come out to their farms and work with them and learn about what they're doing there so that they know what they can request and they know what it takes to get this stuff. And so they actually help out on the farm. But they were talking to some guy named Greg who owns a bakery. And it's great because he says, look at a loaf of bread. It's got 50 ingredients. He goes, half of them are probably poisonous, which is probably true. Who knows?
This is like the loaf of bread, like your Wonder Bread you get at the grocery store.
Yeah, and he says his bread uses 5 ingredients. And I'm like, well, that's wonderful. It's like really fresh. It's probably awesome bread. And he uses different kinds of wheat, but
it looked delicious too.
It did look great. But he also said that the store-bought bread takes 4 hours to make, and his takes 60 man hours to make because of the whole process. But he showed the inside of his restaurant, and how he does it is just each day you take it from one stage to the next, and then you put something else in that first stage. So it's not like once you get started, it's just a flow. and 60 hours later, you have a loaf of bread. So if you want to order something, you got to order plenty ahead of time, right?
Or I'm sure they always have fresh bread ready to go.
Yeah,
'Cause that's
I'm
how
sure
you
they
run a
make
business.
a little bit of each kind every day. But yeah, it did look delicious. And I would actually like to see them
Entire
start
documentary about bread.
about bread. Yes, because actually all of the wheat stuff was fascinating to me because my wife is gluten intolerant. She doesn't have celiac, but she can't handle gluten, so we do go gluten free in our house. And they were saying that there is a particular kind of wheat called einkorn, which was one of those ancient ones. It's been around for 10,000 years, but it's not one that anybody grows. And however, I think that was the kind that they said 2 or 3 seeds could get you a square foot of crop, where it takes 30 seeds of your typical wheat to get a square foot of crop. So it takes less seeds to get a higher yield. And they were saying the einkorn, people who are gluten intolerant can actually eat this. And I was like, well, why aren't we using this? Because it's not uniform with the rest of the wheat.
Yeah, it's all part of the system, man.
The system's keeping us down and making me eat terrible gluten stuff instead of real wheat
And tasty stuff.
that's okay to use.
Another aspect they talk about is sort of the marketing of the food and how food is packaged. And they use the example of the bigger trend of, gluten intolerance and gluten free and how they have like gluten free oatmeal. But then there's the marketing, the person they interviewed, I believe he's kind of an expert or something in this sort of field. He says something like, but it's oats. And oats have always been.
They're not. No,
There isn't gluten in anything. In oats.
I liked that he was pointing out like they like to go with these trends. Like the big thing also is all natural. And that's a little misleading on a lot of stuff. It's like,
what does that even mean?
Yeah, and there are poisonous gases that are all natural. So, and he points that out. But I agree with that, where it's like all natural. Yeah, what exactly does that mean? And all of that stuff. I did have to like counter with his gluten-free comment though, because I don't think that gluten-free is just a fad. I think that they finally discovered what it is that is making some people sick, and they're like, oh, it's the gluten in foods. So now we have something that can help people who can't handle that. And I think it's helpful for people like me, who's married to someone who has to go gluten free. And I don't look at everything and figure out what doesn't have gluten in it. So if I go to the store and I'm going to pick something up for my wife, I haven't done all the research she has. So even if it's something that's never had gluten in it, I appreciate the fact that they write gluten free on the packaging. So that's one thing that I'm okay with. But yeah, the all natural stuff or organic, like, was it really like some of those you kind of question whether, it really was or not.
Yeah, I mean, I forget there are rules from the Food and Drug Administration of what can qualify organic, and of course, like anything else, it's not a perfect system.
And anything you're buying from the store anyway that's in a box
is processed in some way.
It's processed in some way, so it's not really all natural. Like you can't shelve something like that. I mean, I'm sure some things you probably can, but like most of that stuff, it's if they didn't process it in some sort of way that isn't entirely natural, then it wouldn't be able to sit on the shelf for however long it takes for someone to walk into the store.
Are you saying that Twinkies are not all natural?
I'm pretty sure they're not all natural, but, well, maybe they are.
Yeah, but they're apocalypse-proof food. 20 years from now, I can still buy the same box of Twinkies.
And it'll still be delicious.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be.
I'm not opposed to some of this crap food. I love crap food.
Although, one thing I was thinking about the gluten-free, and I'm sure there's a picture floating around all online of like a barber shop, and the sign outside says all haircuts gluten-free.
That's fantastic. So what else did they kind of hit on? Like I said, the 4 seasons there, and I thought it was kind of cool to, it's one of those family-owned farms, and yeah, they sold it for 18 years, but they got it back into the family, and now the son he's even on there saying, hey, I love doing what my dad loves to do. So, I like seeing those kind of things happen. Whereas they were talking about, when was it? Probably back in was it the 60s when, families were losing their farms?
The 80s was the 1980s.
It was
the farm
80s.
crisis.
Yeah. And so they were losing their family farms. And it's like, well, because I don't know, because all of the corporations and just making this all just one big corporate entity instead of the personable thing that it used to be, which is what they're trying to reroute it into, is not just growing chemical free and being organic, but also involving yourself in the community and talking to the people you're selling to. And, just that sense of community is great. And I think that is just a life thing in general, that we're kind of losing a sense of community in this country. It's all Facebook and, social media is meant to keep people in touch, but I think it actually works in the opposite way.
Well, like any piece of technology, it's inherently neutral. There are great things about social media.
Oh,
there
I'm
are
not saying
terrible
there's
things
not.
about social media.
Yeah.
Good thing about social media is, for example, I can see my cousin and he posts pictures of like his 2-year-old daughter. They live in another state that I can't necessarily visit all the time.
Oh, yes.
So I can still at least see videos of this, like first cousin once removed or something, of this little girl and still feel like I'm a part of her life in some way. But then there's bad stuff about social media, like harassing people who are involved in certain movies that rhyme with bed-eye, cast bed-eye,
Yes.
by harassing them off social media and giving them death threats.
Yeah.
That is not okay.
Okay. And another good thing is that we can make a podcast and then we can tweet it out so people can listen to us bitch and moan about social media and then say how great it is too.
All 89 of my followers.
Well, that's 89 people there.
That's true.
Or is it 89? Or is it 80?
88 of them are bots.
You're all fake people.
I think the 89th person is you. And by you, I mean you, Kyle, my co-host. Not to you, although it could be you, lovely listeners.
You can find us at Awesome KM.
And check out our MySpace and Friendster.
I used to have a MySpace. I'm that old.
Was there a song playing whenever you went to that page?
I don't even remember how to use MySpace. It was MySpace, the Facebook precursor. So anyway,
Which times were you active on a lot of MUDs? Of course, that goes way back. They're like precursors to chat rooms and forums. So
I mean, I would have been around when they came about because I was in high school at the dawn of the internet age. So, but I don't remember those. I do remember chat rooms though.
anyway,
So chemicals bad, organic good, community. Does that sum it up?
yeah. Let's talk a bit before we wrap up here. Let's talk about the filmmaking. I mean, I guess there's different types of documentaries. There's sort of the what I think of kind of like the classic, the BBC Planet Earth type of documentary where it shows footage of something like a cat or a penguin, and then there's a pleasant voice narrating information. And then there's another style of documentary kind of pioneered by a lot of people. Like I'm thinking like your Marseilles brothers or your Marseilles and your Errol Morris, kind of those documentarians are real big pioneers of the form. And they're basically what they did was a lot of kind of more slice of life stuff. There's stuff like, I know Grey Gardens is a very famous example of slice of life where there isn't necessary overarching narration. It's just kind of footage and how the footage is put together with interviews and seeing people interact, kind of these more slice of life documentaries, which can then lead to something like mockumentaries and music documentaries. A famous music documentary would be something like Gimme Shelter, which is a very good music documentary about the concert with the Rolling Stones. And then there's the mockumentary, something like This Is Spinal Tap.
Goes up to 11.
Why can't you just make everything louder when it goes all the way up to 10?
Good question. I don't remember the last quote.
Because it goes up to 11.
It's been a while since I've seen that, but that's a fantastic documentary. Check it out. Yeah, and I guess this would be kind of slice of life, but it also does have that other feel like your Planet Earth because there's a lot of just nice footage of the farms. It was very beautifully shot. There was a lot of great sunset shots and just the crops and everything. So and then you have the talking head stuff interspersed within there.
It's definitely closer to a more traditional talking head documentary.
Yes. It just has some
to,
nice shots interlaced within it.
It's not like something like The Thin Blue Line, which has a lot of kind of big, fancy music combined with a lot of the recreations.
Yeah, this one didn't have really. This one didn't. That's another thing is a lot of documentaries do the recreations and all of that, but this one didn't. It was just straight up showing them on the farm at the different times.
It's kind of hard to do a recreation when you can just show them doing the thing in the first place, as opposed to like a crime documentary or something about a murder, like The Thin Blue Line, which is another great documentary. People should watch that. It's pretty much
they couldn't just film the crime as it's happening and say this is how it happened.
But no, what I like with The Thin Blue Line is I think it's important that everyone should watch at least once, because Forensic Files, all these crime shows that like your grandma would watch, 48 Hours, Diagnosis Murder, all these big documentaries, these TV shows, it all runs back to The Thin Blue Line. It was kind of the first of that particular style.
And I honestly don't think I have seen that one. It's just one that kind of passed me by, and I never went back around to watch it again.
It's one of those cultural osmosis sort of things.
Yeah, I've heard about it and everything, and just never went back to watch it. So I suppose that should go on my to-watch list that now has 7,553 movies on it or so.
Okay. Is that an exact count?
That's kind of an estimation. So there is only one part that we didn't talk about yet. There was also that hippie from the 60s who wanted to go off grid, Nyman. and
that guy deserves his own documentary.
And he raises pigs and grass-fed cows now, which was another thing that was they were saying that grazing is good for the soil too. So he was using that to get the soil back to growing condition, which he said when he bought the farm. He hasn't bought the farm yet. Sorry.
When he got the ranch, basically, what he found out was the ground was not very good. And they realized through their work and research that grazing naturally more grass-fed beef as opposed to the more contained corn-fed beef is that grass-fed, when they're grazing around, it actually does very well because the very hooves themselves, they go around flipping and they can spread the seeds of all these sort of grazing material or whatever.
And then they're also stamping the carbon into the ground and everything. So it's just, so then you graze for a while and then you grow crops
somewhere
there.
else, really.
Then you graze somewhere else while you grow crops there. It seemed, I agree with you. It seemed weird that we had actually gone to this because it seemed like almost like a separate little sub documentary about this guy who decided to do this, and because they didn't really need to go to that, because eventually we find out that Marty and his crew started raising pigs themselves, and they kind of do a similar thing where like they're trying to keep them fed well, and they will like pull their pens and like they'll have them graze on different areas of their land and just move them every day to a different spot. And then they talked about, how 95% of animals consumed are raised in confinement. And these animals are not healthy. They're not treated well. They don't eat well. They get medications into them, which in turn is going to affect the quality of the meat.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you go with the natural grazing, grass-eating or grass-fed cows and pigs and stuff like that, you're going to get a much healthier meat out of it too. So I hope that we can eventually find a way to get to where this is sustainable, but it's going to have to go through a lot of government loopholes that don't want to lose their money, unfortunately, just like everything else.
Well, like anything else, if you want to change the way a corporation, you just got to somehow find a way to make better money than they do.
Yep. Yeah, because agriculture, they said that it was the number 2 culprit in climate change, but they didn't say what number 1 was. And I tried to Google it quick before we started here, and a couple of sites that popped up are saying that agriculture is one of the biggest contenders. I mean, they said number 2, but yeah, like the biggest contender of climate change, and it generates more emissions than I found a site that said it generates more emissions than all of the planes, ships, and vehicles in the world combined. The greenhouse gas emissions.
Cows make a lot of methane.
Yes. So and that was one thing with all of the confined cows, and that's a problem we have around here with pig farms and all of that stuff, where you've got all that buildup, and where's it going? It's going.
Yeah, where does the waste go?
It's going into our water supply, which needs to be then cleaned up, and it's kind of a mess. So I kind of understand both sides of the story. Like I said, to feed the ever-growing population, there does need to be some sort of mass produced, because if you're going to do open range grazing, cow-fed grass-fed cows, you have to have a lot more room for the cows, which means you can have a lot less cows and pigs in these things. So you would need bigger farms to produce the same amount of meat for those.
But we're not economics professors or ag professors in any way, shape, or form.
No, I do not proclaim to be a expert in any of these fields. So
that may be obscure Batman villains.
Yes, probably not.
And Crazy Quilt.
But anyway, so yeah, this was a kind of an eye-opening documentary. Just things need to change, and I don't think that they went after big corporations and stuff like that, but they didn't. That wasn't the focus of this, was to bash what they're doing. It was more to say, well, it could be changed and could be done a better way. We need to find a better way.
Yeah, the emphasis of this film was definitely more about using Marty Travis and his farmers. Like, okay, this is a case study, and if everything works for this particular farm in this area, and as well as these farms over here, what can we do to help them spread this method and these farming techniques, like a seed, like a bridge over troubled water or something?
Yeah, so
this episode was brought to you by nothing, because we do not have a sponsorship.
But according to the end of the movie, you can join the food movement or support a national food policy at sustainablefoodfilm.com. Yeah, I watched their documentary. I liked it. I'll plug that.
Yeah, that's probably worth plugging. Who would you recommend this to?
Anybody who's interested where their food comes from, like really interested. Most people are like, oh, I like to eat organic, blah, blah, blah. But they don't really care. I mean, they're not, it seems like a fad to some people, with some people. But those people who really want to know what the food is, what it takes to make this food and how it gets to you and how it affects families and farms and everything, I would recommend this. And just anybody who likes documentaries in general, it was a well-made documentary, and it was informative and, like I said, well shot, nice to look at. The people they interviewed, the family that they followed, were good on camera, and they were well educated themselves. They knew the farming because they had generations of farmers in their family.
Yeah, I think it was a great idea to have them sort of be the central focus where you hitch everything else onto.
And it kind of gives
Marty Travis and his family, they are very likable people.
Yeah. And it kind of gives you that personable feeling, because they are very community oriented. So you get that vibe from them. And then watching it, it's like you're watching just a next door neighbor, just talking about how they produce all of this stuff. And so it's very personable and easy to watch. It's not, some people get turned off by documentaries because it's going to be boring, just talking about this subject. And a lot of documentaries, I have to admit, are boring because they just have talking heads, and you're not you're interested in the subject, but it's not present. A lot of them don't present it in a way that's fascinating or engaging. And I felt this one was a little more engaging because they were so personable.
Or another, when a lot of people think of documentaries, they think of, like sort of the big Ken Burns, like
Yeah.
like Ken Burns Civil War, those kind of giant monsters, which are just chopped up into episodes when it's like a 5-hour documentary about something.
Yeah, they think, oh, it's going to be forever. This is a fairly short, this is an hour and a half. And it got a lot of information in there. And it was just a movie I recommend for anybody, really.
So go to your local farmer's market and then come back home, make yourself a nice lunch or whatever. And then you can watch this documentary and feel good about going to the farmer's market, talking to the farmers.
Indeed. So that is sustainable. We are sustainable. Is this podcast sustainable?
I certainly hope so.
Only time will tell. I think so.
Only Simba the cat will tell.
And speaking of being sustainable, I think we need to figure out what we want to watch next time.
Okay. Well, while you set up that, I'm going to vamp and then talk about some other random things.
How about you talk about what genre we want to watch next?
Well, I always enjoy a good horror movie, whether it be good or bad.
Okay, you know what? We got kind of burned on the last horror movie, which means that I think that we're due for a good one.
Yeah, this one will be like Dracula or Nosferatu or
that would be
Dracula
fantastic.
2000.
So, and just to mention, I'm sure we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, Sustainable is available on Netflix, and I think you should watch it. Anyway, we're gonna spin the wheel here. Round and round and round it goes. Random horror. Who really knows? Oh, first of all, 1984, which already means it's going to be good. So, that's my thing. I grew up with 80s horror movies, so they're my favorite. We've got Splatter University.
This sounds very trauma-y.
Let's see. This is on
Amazon Prime.
Amazon Prime. There you go. And Snag Films, which is a free service. So if you don't have Amazon Prime, you can see this on Snag Films.
Which I have never heard of.
That is one that I haven't gone to. I've done Tubi, I've done Vudu, and even Sony Crackle. But this one is a sociology instructor finds her new teaching duties at a private college interrupted by the presence of a killer.
So, sounds like a slasher if I had to guess.
I think so.
Who's in it?
We're looking. It's directed by Richard W. Haynes. I don't know.
Is that a real name? It's not Alan Smithy, is it?
Did he start Haynes Underwear?
Look, we got our Haynes on now. It only makes sense. No, it's spelled differently.
Yes. Well, that's just to make it look like he didn't start it. Forbes Riley. Never heard of her. And just a bunch of people I've never heard of.
Not even like Harry Dean Stanton or one of those character actors who shows up in everything, like Dick Miller.
No, we don't. We don't even have that guy.
Aw, I like that guy.
Well, that's too bad. But it is 1984's Splatter University on Amazon Prime or Snag Films with a tagline of "Earn a higher degree in terror."
Nice. So that would be a BA or a DOA, I guess. Well, until next time, I'm Noah Saturn.
And I'm Kyle Mulford. And until next time, eat your veggies.
Eat your veggies, kids.